STORMWATER. He is with Burns, Clancy & Associates out of the Champaign-Urbana area. Don grew up on a farm and has a lot of experience with drainage districts. His dad's a drainage district commissioner. And if I ever have a question, I can call Don and he generally knows the answer. And he's worked with several different districts that have had wind farms come into their area.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Bear with me because I broke my glasses with my bifocals, so I've got glasses issues here. So. Okay, so today we're really kind of focused on wind farms, but this talk also kind of covers solar farms a little bit because a lot of the issues with them are kind of similar as far as that goes. The key issues for the drainage districts, and this presentation really is more of a drainage district focused one, although I've added some individual things for individual landowners to think about as well. What are the issues and concerns that you're going to have, and when should you be concerned or not concerned? And, you know, properly done, a wind farm, a solar farm can be a real asset. It's not properly done, then you've got a whole different ballgame. So the key is making sure that things get done properly so that you don't have problems down the road. It's a long-term commitment, 50 years or more. So you've got to think that way. You can't think about what next year, 2 years from now. You've got to think 50 years from now for what that is. And that means you're going to use written documentation so that you know what everybody's agreed to. Because 50 years from now, most of us are not going to be here. And that agreement's still going to be in existence. And those folks are going to have to be sure to know what was agreed upon. And, you know, same way with the wind farm or the solar farm people. If you know, those are corporate entities. Those folks will change. So you better have it written down, everything you can think of, as far as what's going to happen. You really have a couple of issues: initial construction issues, decommissioning issues, and then, you know, some other technical issues along the way. For drainage districts, there's a couple of things that you want to do right from the get-go. Know what you own. What are your facilities? The drainage code says you have a map. You're required to have a map, an updated current map of your facilities. Do you have such a thing? If you do not, get one. Because, again, the wind farm, solar farm folks, one of the first things their attorneys are going to ask for is a map. If you haven't got one, then you're in trouble. Know what your right-of-way is also. How many of you know what your right-of-way is along your ditch or your tiles? Anybody? One hand. Nobody knows what their right-of-way is. Figure it out. Find out what it is. It's in your documentation. If you don't have documentation of what your right-of-way is for your drainage district facilities, there's a process to go through to reestablish your right-of-way, your easements for your facilities. Do that. Do that. Particularly, you know, if you think that there's something coming, do that right away to make sure that you can show those folks what it is you own, where your easements are. And also, if you believe that there's going to be a solar farm or a wind farm or a subdivision or something else coming into your district, pipeline going through the middle of your district, you have the ability to adopt construction rules, just like a village would adopt subdivision ordinance requirements or whatever. You can adopt construction rules as to how they're going to fix your tile, how they're going to cross underneath your ditch, all of those kinds of things. And it is very important that you adopt those rules, because otherwise you have a much less ability to identify for those applicants, whether they be wind farms or pipelines, doesn't really matter what it is you want them to do. Because you can say they are right here. Here they are the rules. Typically, we also have people adopt the rules and then take them to the judge and have the judge issue a court order over the top of them, saying, yes, these are this drainage district's construction rules, and I approve them. Because in several instances, the corporate attorneys for a utility company have come in and said, well, your rules, whether you've got rules or don't have rules, we've obtained easements from the farmers, so we don't need to listen to what you have to say. And so if you go into court then to talk to the judge about enforcing what you want done, your very first thing is to say, well, Your Honor, we're just trying to enforce the rules that you approved, because it's probably going to be the same judge. Your rules that you approved with your court order, we would like them to follow your court order. You're going to win that case. The judge is not going to say, oh, yeah, my court order, they can ignore that. Not happening. They're going to be required to do that. So that's important, those construction rules. And again, Sarah can get you some examples. I can get you some examples, and we can, you can do that pretty quickly. Easements and agreements. If you've got easements and agreements, this is really more for both drainage districts and individual landowners. Where are things at? If it turns out it's not constructed, is there a sunset clause? Crop damages? Those kinds of things need to be included in those easements and agreements. Because even if you're an individual landowner, I can guarantee that the wind farm folks or the utility company, you have to understand the process. So let's say there's a wind farm and there's 75 towers. Okay, they may have 200 plus employees out there working every day. If you think that the supervisors and the utility company and the wind farm management are able to tell worker X out of that 200 where the easement is, so that that worker knows every day where it is on this farm or that farm, you're dreaming. Maybe you're using cannabis from the new facility, but it's not happening. And those guys are typically not necessarily local guys, because they travel from installation to installation, specialized in doing those wind farms. And so it's not that they are bad guys, it's just that they don't know. They don't know what the deal is with you or your particular property or with the drainage district. They're just doing it the way they always do it. And if that's not what you want, it doesn't matter. So understand that, put it in writing so that you can know what's going on. Here's some other things. Out of bounds penalties. You can just kind of go through, obviously, insurance, those kinds of things. So for the drainage district, site plan is important. What are they putting where? It's not just for what are they putting inside your district? And where are they putting it? Where are the transmission lines going? Are they underground? Are they above ground? Where are the access lanes? How is this going to impact drainage? Does it fix, is there any places where they're going to put other facilities that they're going to fence off or whatever? I had one of my drainage districts where, surprise, They had purchased 10 acres right next to the ditch and put up 8-foot tall fencing with barbed wire around the top that covered the drainage district easement, and they plopped transformers and other stuff right in the way. Well, how do you now maintain the ditch? You can't even get through. And even if you could take the fence down, here's this big ass transformers all in the way. So you can't do anything anymore. Again, if they had known ahead of time that was going to happen, then they could have said, move that thing over so we can get through. But they didn't know, and so there they are, stuck today with a major problem. And of course, the wind farm didn't care, right? Not their problem to fix that ditch. This is really more for individuals, you know, but the tower construction, most all of this kind of stuff is covered by county regulations or other things, but just to kind of be aware of those things. For individuals, you know, the shadow flicker could be an issue. Blade heights, if you have like an individual one that's a small one, be careful about blade heights. Make sure that you've got clearance, because in some cases you'll have, you know, I have as an example, I've had 3 or 4 cases where like a school district has put up a tower just for them, and you know, at the edge of their school property, and then they had all these other issues come into play about that. So watch for that. Sound issues, probably sound issues may be the thing that people are concerned about the most. Again, you have to kind of pay attention. What's the prevailing wind? Do you have an animal operation that's going to be sensitive? You know, what are the setbacks? Again, a lot of this tends to be covered by the county regulations and reasonableness and appropriate. So it doesn't really apply to drainage districts, but it's something as landowners to be aware of and to know and understand before you get started in the whole process. For wind farms and the drain tiles, really it's the power cable installation, which is usually underground, the driveway construction, and the wind turbine construction are the 3 elements that can disrupt your facilities. And so those are the things to be careful of. If you think that this guy plowing in the power cables is looking for drain tile as he goes through and crosses, think again. He's gonna, if he hits a 4-inch plastic tile there, he doesn't even know it. He never slows down. So you've got to understand what it is they're doing, how they're going to do it, and understand that that guy driving that thing may not even know what a drain tile is. I'm serious. I'm totally serious. I've gone to many sites where the workmen say, "What's a drain tile? Never heard of that." I'm from Arizona. What? What's a drain tile? So understand what you're working with here. The access roads, are those access roads going to be disruptive in some way to the drainage of the district, to the drain tiles, and so on? Here are some suggestions for how to repair those tiles. Make sure that the conduit is a minimum of 2 feet below your existing tile. You can make it more if you want, but at least 2 feet. You want to make that tile repair in solid PVC water main pipe, not drainage tubing, not ABS dual wall type pipe. Make it stronger yet with water main quality PVC. And the reason for that is that they'll have a trench and they're going to bridge over that trench. There is no way that they have compacted that trench sufficiently between their cable below and that tile. And if you use something that's not really strong, you're just going to get a sag in that spot, no matter what you do. So you don't want that sag, so make it strong. I've got some districts that say it's got to be ductile iron pipe, but PVC should work. tile underneath the access lanes. You're going to be driving up and down those access lanes. You're going to be driving those access lanes with concrete trucks, with big equipment, with cranes to install those turbines. And so you better have them before they put that access lane in. Change that tile from old 100-year-old clay tile to, or even plastic tile to reinforced concrete pipe, so that you know that it's not going to get crushed. Because if you don't, it will get crushed. And again, you may not know that it's crushed or flattened for another 6 months or a year. And once they're gone, they're gone. They moved on to someplace else. And if you think that the operator is going to then say, oh yeah, sure, I'll be there tomorrow to fix your tile, think again. If you don't get it when they're there, then you are going to have trouble getting it fixed. That's just the way they operate. They're a big corporation. Your $500 towel repair is nothing to them. Not because they don't care, they do care, but in the big scope of things of spending thousands, tens of thousands of dollars a day, your $500 towel repair is nothing. So it won't get very high priority and it won't happen. And so make sure that you've got it fixed ahead of time so it doesn't happen. Tile relocates, that seldom happens for the towers. Usually the towers are on high ground, so there may not be a tile that gets impacted. This is probably one of my key things. I'll use this as an example of what to watch out for. So I had a client in Indiana, and he had 160 acres, and he had two towers on his 160. It was this time of year, and he had gone on vacation for like a month. Arizona, I don't know, he was out of the state. Okay. So they put up the turbine at this spot, and it was going to be, 3/4 of a mile around to get to the drive to the other tower off the other township road. Well, the workmen were like, well, it's 1,000 feet across the field that way, or disassemble the cranes, run it all around, reassemble the cranes, put it all back. Hell, we'll just grab a hold of those cranes with bulldozers, and we'll just drag them over there, through the mud. They left 2-foot-plus deep ruts for 1,000 feet across his 160 acres. Every single, he had pattern tiled it 2 years before. Every single line was crushed, all the way across, 1,000 feet. And he didn't even know about it until he went out there to plant. And so then getting the wind farm guys back and fixing those tile lines was incredibly difficult for him. He ended up having to sue them, saying, hey, all my tiles are crushed. My pattern tile system is destroyed. Watch out for things like that. You have to pay attention. During construction, you have to pay attention because the workmen are nice guys, they're reasonable fellows, but they're there to do a job to put up wind turbines. They're not there to protect your interests. And they will do it the quickest way they can. And if you're not watching to say, no, don't do that, they will do it if that's the easiest way for them. So just understand that. Like I said, it's not that they're being bad guys, this is the way we do it in Arizona or wherever. So understand that. Surface drainage, culverts at access lanes. I don't know how many times I've seen waterways where that's the waterway low spot, so let's make sure to fill that in with gravel extra deep so that we can drive over that without having to worry about water. Well, of course, then the upstream water flow is blocked. But again, the guy doing it from who knows where, and surface drainage wasn't an issue for them, so he doesn't even know he's doing something wrong. You can have some additional runoff depending on what's going on. Soil compaction, and like I said, waterway crossings. Watch out for those things. Transmission lines. Locations of transformers and substations and those sorts of things. Where are they going to be at? Are they going to impact anything for the drainage district or the private landowner? You want to make sure that if they're putting something underground, it's deep enough to accommodate what you think you're going to need for future tile. Because if not, they'll put it in at 2.5 to 3 feet deep, and then you're stuck. You either have to be really deep with the tile or really shallow. So there's that. And sometimes, on occasions, overhead systems are needed, and watch out for those also about where they are placed. I had a drainage district where they basically none of the wind farm facilities were going to be on the drainage district's right of way, and so they didn't pay attention to the last thing, which was the overhead. It turned out they were going to put a big overhead tower system a couple miles over to the electric company's big substation. Where did they design all that? Right at the top of the bank, all along the channel, because the substation was 2 miles away, right next to the drainage channel. So suddenly these towers are going up in their right of way that they had no idea about, because they were told no turbines in your area, on your no turbines for you, not to worry. Well, except that not so much. So now they had a problem with these towers in the way for maintenance. Solar farms is kind of similar. You've got the power cable installation. You've got the solar panel installation, which can be a problem for access for future repairs. What if the main tile line was running through the middle of that? How are you going to fix that tile line in the future? Because the way they build those things, they just pound the 4 posts in for the 4 corners of those solar panels. And if that tile goes underneath the panel, you're going to be fixing it in the future with a spade on your knees underneath. There's no way to fix it easily. So you got to watch out for those things. Kind of talked about some of these: blockage of flow, maintenance of the waterways, blockage of flow by fencing. If there's a facility that they're going to fence, understand and take a look at. You think, well, okay, it's a chain link fence, no big deal, right? Except that then you get this, where the blockage of flow is stopped. The flow in this particular location was from kind of behind those panels this way. And there was no waterway, it was just the surface flow. But the fencing had basically, blocked up drainage, and so there was about 4 or 5 acres back there that were all flooded because the fencing had blocked drainage, and it had gotten debris piled up against it and some corn stalks, and it ended up a mess. So again, those are the kinds of things to think about. It's not just it's not always obvious what you have to think about when you're doing that. And solar farms is one of my big things. The solar farms will all tell you, well, it's just the panels on top, and so it's all grass underneath, and you don't have to worry about any extra stormwater runoff because it's all the same. Well, not quite. What happens is you get this panel that's focusing the drainage down at that spot in the ground, and depending on how things work, it may or may not increase stormwater runoff from that site. If you have a facility that's more than 20 acres in size, you almost certainly need to have stormwater detention, just as if it was a Kmart parking lot or a new subdivision of homes, because there will be substantially increased drainage flow.
Yeah. What if you're an adjacent landowner and you have no control over any of this, whether it's wind towers, anything like that, what rights do you have? I've got a farm that's gonna be downhill from the solar farm. What rights do I have as a landowner?
Well, that's really a legal question, and I'm an engineer. Those guys may be able to answer that better than I, but.
You know, we have a lot of landowners, and we're seeing in these leases that Amos, you're waiving AMA rights for you. So that's my question. We're talking about all the things we need to watch for, but are we giving up rights? You know, if the adjacent landowner gives up AMA rights in the lease, then what rights do I have to stop them from doing that, short of spending a lot of money?
Well, the last part of that, I'm not sure that you're going to get away with not spending money. I think part of the issue becomes what adverse effect is that going to have on your land, all right? As far as is the solar farm going to increase the flow of water across your land? Okay. Is it going to result in discharging water on other parts of your land, which typically would not have that burden? So it would seem to me that would be one of your initial questions, or things that come through in my mind as to whether or not you have much ability on that.
So is it the responsibility of our zoning and our county commissioners to deal with these issues as part of their consideration of these projects?
Well, I would think you want to be working with the county officials. Now, there may be a limit as to what their ability is to help sort of a private landowner, all right? But to the extent that they have regulations, requirements for construction, you can insist that they enforce those. And, there can be legal action against those authorities for not following through on their obligations as well. But yes, I think what you want to do, the hot button part of that is to be on top of your elected officials.
I'm going to ask, and I don't mean to single you out, but hold your questions until they get done with their presentations. And then at the end, we'll open it all up for questions. Write them down so that you don't forget them. If you're me, I'd forget mine maybe. But let them finish their presentations, and then we'll have a question and answer session at the end. Okay?
So, yeah, and the 20 acres for the stormwater detention park for solar farms comes from research done, I want to say, from University of Connecticut, somewhere out east. There's actually been some research done on at what point does the flow of water start to be obviously increased, and they just sort of focused 20 the research said 18.2 acres or something. 20 acres is kind of where we all went to as far as a good rule of thumb, and that is a rule of thumb. Okay, erosion control, pretty much from an engineer's perspective, the standard erosion control procedure should be followed, and to make sure that vegetation is established. I've been to wind farms where they put up the tower and it's all just weeds around the tower. They never actually put down any grass in the area around the tower, and it's not going to be farmed. It's all just grown up and button weeds and thistles and whatever else. So that's something to understand about what's going to happen with those things if you're an individual landowner. For drainage districts, particularly if there's whether it's a wind farm, this is really more solar farm identified, weed control, brush control, and a maintenance plan that's enforceable. So you have this wind farm and it's all, it's 40 acres of solar farm and it's all inside a fence and it's all grown up with thistles and all kinds of stuff, and the neighbors are getting all this weed seeds blown onto them, and yet nothing's being done. So that's an important element that you want to make sure that that it is in fact enforceable, because of course if the solar farm folks say, oh sure, here's our maintenance plan, but then 2 years later they're not following it and the county has no ability to actually enforce it, what good did it do? It was fun paper, but you might as well throw it in the fireplace and burn it the next day, because they had no ability to actually tell them, yes, you gotta do that. Because they already had the permit. It's already built, there it is. So make sure that it's enforceable. That if your county or your township or whatever is gonna have one of those. Channel crossings, drainage district for channel crossings. You probably want that cable to be 5 feet below the bottom of your ditch. And there are state regulations about those crossings, and there's state requirements, but if, as a drainage district, you want to make sure that you separately have your own requirements, because you want to be able to enforce them. And there are state requirements, but there's nobody at the state inspecting anything to confirm that they are actually following the rules. And so I can guarantee you that what will happen is that if you think that they are not deep enough and you file a complaint with the State Department of Ag or the Office of Water Resources for the permits channel crossings, they will send out somebody, and the folks installing the cable will magically produce evidence that the cable's deep enough, when you couldn't get such evidence before. But if you in fact dig down, that cable's not where they say it is. They can do any of this stuff. And just last year, I had a situation where they were the folks, the subcontractor installing the cable below the channel was supposed to be 5 feet deep, and they installed it about 2.5 feet deep. But they certified that it was 5 feet deep. So we went out, so the drainage district went out there with a high low and started digging. Said, well, if we dig 3 feet down, right? No problem, because, and this was before the turbines had been turned on, before there was any power in those cables. He said, well, you're 5 feet deep, you certified it's 5 feet deep, so we're gonna dig 3 feet deep here, just to confirm. Guess what? They cut the cable. And then the wind farm folks were all in a tizzy about the fact that their power cables that cost them tens of thousands of dollars had been cut. And the drainage district said, you were supposed to be 5 foot deep. We only dug 3. You catch a cable, so obviously you weren't 5 foot deep. And wait a minute, here's your certification that you're 5 foot deep. How do you got a problem? So you need to understand that if they're going to put in temporary channel crossings, make sure that they have adequate culvert capacity and an adequate system to do that temporary channel crossing, so that it doesn't obstruct the flow. Sometimes they actually end up putting in permanent channel crossings, and in that case you want to have a bridge that is basically, or a large box culvert or something that can handle the 25 years storm flow capacity, whatever that is. And you want to make sure that that's correct. Anything less than that is probably unacceptable. Solar farms, again, kind of off topic a little bit here, but there's really 2 things to watch out for solar farms for toxic materials: cleaning solutions and damaged panels. Those panels have to be cleaned every so often. And so depending on what happens, those cleaning solutions, when you start cleaning 40 acres of panels, there's a lot of cleaning solution coming off those panels and ending up on the ground that's then going to get washed away in the next rainstorm and downstream onto your field and then down into the channel. So, and you don't see anything there to try and catch that cleaning solution. And it's pretty, it's not, notice that he's wearing gloves. not like he's gonna, it's nice and soft and easy. And then the other thing is these solar panels actually contain toxic materials. So they could be damaged, this is hail damage, but they could be damaged, and so once they're damaged like that, those toxic materials, mercury, and other stuff can leak out of these and then onto the ground. And of course, when's that gonna happen? That hailstorm's gonna happen in the middle of a rainstorm. And all that stuff is now gonna be washed out washed downhill, potentially onto the farm ground, and to be having to be dealt with. So I actually know of an instance where there was a very bad hailstorm. It was like a 30-acre solar farm, and virtually every panel was smashed by the hail, and there was about 40 acres of contaminated land downstream that had to come in with moon suits and the whole shebang to remediate that 40 acres. Imagine if you were the neighboring landowner and that happened. Really, really troublesome for you. So that's something to watch out for. Emergency procedures also. Out of bounds access. Emergency contacts 24/7, 365. That's an important one for everybody who is not just 24/7, 360. Not just, well, call me between 8 and 4. You know, it's every day, any day, because you think that some emergency can happen. It's never going to happen at 9:30 in the morning. It's going to happen on a Tuesday. It's going to happen at 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday night. Those kinds of things happen. So make sure you've got that. And how they're going to respond. Last but not least, a decommissioning plan. What's going to happen if someday these towers are going to be need to be replaced, or they're going to be out of date, and it becomes whether it's the wind farm or the solar farm folks, they say, you know what, it's going to be cheaper to build brand new than it is to update all of these and replace all of these. And so their tendency will be to declare bankruptcy and disappear, and you're stuck with these things on your ground with nothing to deal with it. So we need to make sure that there is a decommissioning plan, and how things are going to get restored and what's going to happen with that, and then that there's money available to do that, whether or not the utility company remains in business, because that's the key. Again, these are businessmen and women in New York or Geneva or Tokyo or somewhere, and they don't really care about you. They're just looking at the bottom line for their company. What's cheapest for us? If it's cheaper for them to walk away, then that's what they will do, because that's they're just in it. They're there to make money. So make sure that you have a decommissioning plan that's a legitimate decommissioning plan, and not, again, just kind of like that maintenance plan. If it's not enforceable, that decommissioning plan might be used 30, 40, 50 years from now. So you got to think long term. What is it going to take? They can put. I actually saw this happen where a solar farm group convinced the county board that they would put up. They needed a decommissioning plan, and they put the decommissioning plan, and they said, okay. Now, what's the county board insisted that they submit a bond for the amount of money that it would take to do the decommissioning, and so they did the bond for what it was going to cost today, and that's what the county approved. But 30 years from now, if you think that bond for whatever it was, $500,000, is gonna be enough money to actually do that decommissioning plan 30 years from now. We all know that's not gonna happen, right? But they didn't put an inflation escalator clause in it. That's the number. 30 years from now, it's gonna be worthless. And so they, you gotta think about those things. What's happening down the road? And that's a good example of ones that weren't decommissioned. You can see these are much smaller ones, smaller power units. This is actually a picture from Europe, some of the early ones in Europe where they've been, there was no decommissioning plan here, and so all of these are all abandoned. And it's up to the individual landowner now to figure out how to get rid of them, take them down. And no amount of payments down through the years is going to cover the cost of that. So even though they got all those payments all those years, it's a net negative in the long run. For drainage districts, you want to have permit agreements, contracts that spell out the terms of approval, establish construction inspections, establish a surety, and establish fees. And I can't say this enough. Every drainage district I know of operates on a minimum funding level because you don't really want to try, you don't want to pass a lot of costs onto all your landowners. Understand that these wind farms are spending $30, $40, $50, $100 million. So if it takes $100,000 for you to protect yourself, that is pocket change compared to $150 million or $100 million. Do not be afraid to tell the wind farm folks, we need $50,000 to make sure that we have somebody who's going to be there every day and inspect what you do when you're on our right of way in our facilities, so that we make sure that you repair it correctly. Do not be afraid to spend money and then tell them, we're not paying for it. You're the ones going to make the profit. We're not going to sign that approval until we have a check in hand for this money. And we've cashed it, and we've got the money so that we can spend it to protect ourselves. So again, just be firm on that kind of stuff, because if you aren't, again, many commissioners get in this mode of, oh gee, it's going to cost us tens of thousands of dollars for our attorney to develop this opinion, for our engineer to look at what they're doing and hire all this, and so it looks pretty good, so yeah, it's okay, go on. Well, you're making a big mistake, because it shouldn't cost you a penny to review and approve and create all of this stuff. It should be the wind farm, solar farm actually paying for all of that, so that the landowners don't pay anything. So, kind of in summary, cover the issues in writing. Think long term. Think 30, 40, 50 years, not tomorrow, not next year. Establish construction rules and operational rules to understand how it's going to function for the next decades. And, as I said, all of the issues that are out there can be addressed, and they can be dealt with, but you have to understand how a wind farm or a solar farm gets built. And so understand that it's up to you to protect your interests. It's not that the guys doing the work are bad folks at all, or are intending to cause harm. They just do it because they don't know any better. And so you have to watch. You can't rely upon them to watch, because there's just too many working parts in it. There's too many people involved and too many supervisors. And, there's 200 people out there working. And if you think that, the thing that happens is, the quality of the work today is based upon the worst work of the one workman who does the worst job. And I can guarantee you, when you got 200 workmen out there, somebody spent last night in the bar, didn't get enough sleep, is hungover, and, you know, and is not necessarily paying attention and doing his best. And that's the quality that you get today. And so you may end up with a problem. So with that, I'm ready for questions on my end, I guess. Does anybody have any questions about what I'm trying to cover? Yeah.
On your picture of the solar panel, I'll take one of your slides, but the new slides of the new panels is basically obsolete from what we've been exposed to. Do you feel that's creating as much an issue on that water retention pond as what you're? I see more of a maintenance on that retention pond than I do the concern of the runoff of that oscillating panel.
Well, the oscillating panel just tips for the sun.
They tip and follow the sun.
They tip and follow the sun, that's right. But if it's raining, they're still tipped and followed for that sun, so they're still creating essentially a roof.
But it's not on one spot.
Well, except wherever that panel is, if it's tipped this way, then it's coming and falling down there.
Right.
If it's tipped this way, it's coming and falling down there. Doesn't matter, it's falling on a spot. A spot. That now, it's not falling in the, you know, that panel is, you know, whatever the size of the panels might be, but if none of those raindrops are falling on the dirt that's directly underneath that panel, wherever that panel is. If it's shifted, well, it's still, you know, it may fall, it's still not falling underneath that panel. So you can still have problems. Again, once the research says that about 20 acres is the spot where you need to start questioning whether or not that's going to cause issues or not. It depends, and I say that 20 acres is where you should start being concerned. Below 20 acres, there's almost certainly not a concern, so not to worry about it. But above 20 acres, there might be, there might not be. Depends on the slope, depends on the soil, all of that.
So to add to that, what he's saying is, if you got a house without gutters, it's all just going to come down. And really, what we ought to be adding is some kind of catchment system that would run like a gutter, would run underneath those panels where it wouldn't be affecting the ground, and you could control the flow from where it needed to go.
Well, the thing is that if you got 20 acres of panels with gutters, the downspout still comes and puts it at a spot. And so you still have that very same problem of
Well,
water
then you need
is.
a catchment, then you need a catchment pond.
Then you, yeah, again,
That would be the answer to that, right?
yeah, you're really talking about a stormwater management pond. Once you get above 20 acres, that's what the research showed.
Oh, no, hey, I'm not.
Yeah, you know,
I'm just trying
to think about it, you know, the steeper the site, the more you gotta be worried as compared to the less steep. Obviously, around here, it's less steep, so it may be bigger than 20 acres, but at 20 acres, you should start thinking about that problem. So, next, anybody?
You know, two questions. One, you know any technology to help us find some of these older drainage style systems to actually locate?
A trencher?
Okay, so.
No, there are, I would say that as a first step, I would, if I were you, as a first step, I would go onto Google Earth or Bing Mapping and the other, I think there's one or two other sites. All of those sites now have aerial photos from different sources dating all the way back to the 1930s. And so a lot of times on those aerial photos, if they happen to take the photo at the right time, you can see a kind of a trace of where the drain tile were. And I'm sure most of you have seen that on aerial photos. And you say, oh wow, that looks like that's a pattern tile system. Not always, but sometimes. Yeah.
I want to address his question. We just ran into that on one of the farms we managed. And the boys up in Taylor got Christian County have got 2 or 3 years that they know they can go to, and they lay those out, we can see tile lines just right down the line. So if you're looking for something like that, that'd be the first place at the FSA office.
Yeah, try the FSA. Like you said, now all of those FSA photos are online with Google Earth or Bing Maps or some of the other, there's 2 or 3 other sites. And so you can get about 40 different aerial photos of your farm, which is kind of even regardless, it's kind of fun to have, see what your farm looked like in the 1930s. And so that's...
The other question I had is,
Yeah.
Can the drainage district, or maybe up to the landowner, actually stop construction? Some of these get pretty ugly, like you talked where they're dragging stuff through the field with bulldozers and going 2 to 4 feet deep. Is there authority of the drainage district to say, hold it, you're going across our mains, you gotta stop?
If they cross a drainage district easement, then yes. But you only have control over the drainage district facilities, which is why I said that you need to know what you own and where it is. Because you can't say to them, I'm sorry, you're in Joe's 40 acres over there, he's got a pattern tile system that connects to our outlet tile over here, our main tile, so don't do anything over there that's going to impact our tile. You can't do that. You can only say, here's what you're doing on our easement. That's the limit of your authority. So, so from that standpoint, from a drainage district, that's part one. Part two is for each of the individual landowners, you want to, when you're negotiating that agreement, you want to think about some of those things. What if they do that to me? What's going to happen? And again, you don't really think of a contractor doing that because none of us would ever even think of going out there today and dragging a crane 1,000 feet across the field. We know it's going to be rutted to pieces. But they're from Arizona or California, or they don't know any better. It was the easiest thing for them to do, and that's what they did. Yeah.
When you mentioned construction with old permit agreements, is that something that needs to be put in their contract that each individual sign? Or to be
those are really more drainage district focused rather than individual landowners, although you could do something, I suppose, with individual landowners. But for drainage districts, you definitely want to have construction rules adopted by the drainage district that are essentially regulations saying whether it's a wind farm or a solar farm or a gas pipeline or fiber optic cable, doesn't really matter. Here are our rules when you construct across our facilities.
Do you have any of these rules as an example?
Yes. Yes, we do. We do. I think IEDD has some stuff as well. So you can, yes, you can get those created relatively easily, go from there.
And that's over and above the county.
Yes, that's over and above the county. That's for your facilities, just the drainage district facilities. And for, I don't think there's anybody here probably that has a lot of urban stuff. We have I work with a number of drainage districts that have a lot of urban encroachment on them. And so in addition to those regulations, they have easement protection regulations, they have stormwater management regulations, they have erosion control regulations. And the reason for those are because, so here's a community, and I can use assumption as an example. Let's say, I don't know, pick some new, they're going to, assumptions here, and a big company comes in and says, we're going to build a new factory and it's going to have 300 full-time jobs. Do you think that assumption will pretty much, the city council will pretty much waive any and all village rules to make that happen? Probably. And so that tends to be what happens. If something that the community really community fathers really want to have happen, that's what ends up happening, is that the developers or the factory or whatever, they'll ask for, all these rules to be waived. And so the community will do that. Well, that then leaves you unprotected. But they have the ability to do it, and they can. But if you have your own rules, then you can say, well, if you waive your rules, ours apply. And the way you set those up is, if you keep your rules in force, then ours are superseded and they don't apply. But when you waive yours, then ours apply, and you got to come to us. So they don't win. There's no advantage for them, for the local community, for the municipality to waive their rules. So that's again, if you've got that urban encouragement issue.
There's another question over here somewhere.
Yeah.
A year or so ago, I think I read an article somewhere that said there was a state law that anytime they went, a power or a turbine company went across your drainage district right away, you could charge up to $10,000 per crossing. Anytime they went across a drainage tile, you could charge up to $4,000. Did I dream that, or is that actually a law?
I'm not aware of any such law. I don't think anybody is, no.
I thought I read it in the Illinois Drainage District newsletter, and it gave the House bill number.
No.
It wasn't a bill, but you can charge them.
Yes, you can charge them whatever you think you need to charge them.
Up to $10,000.
If you $20,000, if that's what you need to cover your costs, then charge them $20,000. Whatever it is you think you need to charge to cover your costs, that's what you can charge. You're not, particularly if you adopt the construction rules that I talked about, because then you set it up. That's what your rules say. And the judge has, if you've then taken it to the court to get that approved, you have a court order saying that's what you can charge. So you can charge, what you need to. And no, I don't think that any judge, again, this is just my opinion, but I don't think that any judge is going to, whatever the fee is not going to object to a fee that simply covers your out-of-pocket costs. You're not trying to make a profit, you're just saying the landowners shouldn't have to pay out of their drainage assessment for the effort that we need to do to cover this wind farm or this fiber optic cable or whatever that construction is. We just want the utility company, the applicant, to pay for the cost, whatever those are. So, anybody else? Other questions? Yes?
My sister has 80 acres and is going to be surrounded on 3 sides with solar panels, and we're talking hundreds of acres. So what does she need to do? They're already started working on it. So what does she need to do to even have a crop on that 80 acres? This sounds like water and toxic chemicals could do her in.
She better get her attorney involved, ASAP, and then maybe go from there, however that's going to be, because she's surrounded on 3 sides by solar. And I'll guarantee, again, most times the solar folks will tell the county board that's approving those kinds of things that, oh yeah, we don't see it, it's all grass underneath our panels, so the water falls and yeah, it falls on the panels, but then it can go underneath, and so we don't increase drainage flow at all. It's not true, but that's what they tell the county board, and the county board says, well, that seems reasonable, yeah, it's all grass under there, so sounds good, yeah.
All right, Don will be around after to answer some more questions, but we want to go ahead and move on to our next speaker. Thank you, Don. Our next speaker is Alan Yao from Randall Bradley. They are an attorney firm over in Jacksonville, and he brought with him Ryan Byers, who will also be.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here today. Actually, it's always tough following John. So good. What
And I brought Ryan today because he has spent the last several years representing landowners dealing with wind farms, negotiating contracts, easements. So I thought to the extent, you all might have questions along those lines, Ryan's a valuable resource. So my talk at the moment will be dealing mainly with, drainage district rights and obligations, and obviously Ryan will be able to answer some questions going forward for your own individual landowner question.
Don't ask me anything about drainage law. What I know about drainage couldn't fill a thimble. He's your drainage guy. I'm your individual landowner guy.
Well, in thinking about drafting or negotiating a contract, I think one of the things that you want to do is consider what your duties are as a commissioner. You always have. Can you all hear me, by the way?
A little louder, please.
Okay, a little louder, okay. You want to think about your duties as a commissioner, because obviously you own or owe an obligation to the landowners to protect the works of the district. In other words, the landowners pay for those levees, ditches, drains, and so you have an obligation to maintain those. So keep that in mind when you are approached by the wind farm or solar farm company. Keep in mind that whatever decisions you make and whatever contract you eventually enter into protects the district. And as part of that, you are also supposed to make sure that you take all reasonable efforts to protect the environment. The Drainage Code actually provides that when you're taking action, make sure you're attempting to, protect the trees, fish, to the greatest extent possible. Now, one thing that I will talk about a little bit more is the process of getting a contract approved. Because it's not just a matter of you being able to negotiate a contract. You have to go to the court and get that approved. So I thought this was a good time to sort of talk in general terms what your powers are as drainage commissioner. You have powers. Some you can exercise without court authority. Some you have to go to court to obtain that approval. But as a general matter, you have the right to an obligation to do all works to protect, repair, and maintain any drain, levee, or other work. I highlight that part because keep that in mind. Your obligations are to protect and maintain the works of the district. Now, doing the normal maintenance work, protecting the district, typically you don't have to go to court to get that authority to do that. You have an annual maintenance assessment. You have the right to go and do what you need to do to maintain the district. But sometimes you do have to go to court, not only just to get a contract approved, all right, for granting a right-of-way, but if you want to enlarge the district, you're going to change the route of the district, you are going to construct one or more pumping plants, you sometimes have to go to court to obtain that approval. And that is simply done by filing a petition with the court asking for approval to do this work. Now that's typically accompanied by a petition or a request for an additional assessment to be paid for that type of work. But in order to go to court, you're going to have to do all the background work ahead of time with the engineers and whomever to find out what actually has to be done, obtain the specifications to do that work. So when you go to court, you can actually explain to the judge what you're planning on doing, why you're doing it, and keep in mind you always have to notify the members or the landowners in your district. And so they're going to receive notice of that hearing. So if anyone comes to object to the particular work, you need to make sure you have the facts and data that support why you are proceeding along those lines. Including the materials, some definition. We know that drainage districts often have levees, they have ditches, they have tiles, But drainage structures also include other things like drop boxes, pipe outlets, and junction boxes. I mention these because as we start talking about negotiating a contract with a wind farm, you want to make sure that you identify all the structures that make up your drainage system. And the drainage code has the definition of drainage system. It means the system by which lands are drained and protected from flooding. And I throw this in here not to scare you, but just as a reminder, when we talked about the duty to protect the district and maintain it, the drainage code provides that you can be held liable for failing to take action if your actions are what we call willful and wanton. All right? So willful and wanton action is kind of a willful sort of indifference. If you're aware of a situation that poses a risk of harm to the landowners, to property, and if you ignore it, don't take any steps to try to rectify the situation, there could be liability on individual commissioners. And if the court was to determine that you were intentionally indifferent, refused to take reasonable steps, well, then the district may not have to indemnify you. Okay? So just keep in mind, this is likely not going to come up part of your negotiation, but do keep in mind you have an obligation to protect the district. Now, do you have the authority even to enter into one of these agreements with the wind company? Yes, you do. Section 30 of the Drainage Code, Section 4-30, provides the authority for you to do this. It says, on such terms as the commissioners may determine. And Don went through a lot of those terms with you a few moments ago. But the commissioners can, on terms that they decide are appropriate in the best interest, grant any public utility company or to any person or corporation a license, easement, or right-of-way on, over, along, through, or across any drain, levee, drainage structure, right-of-way, or real estate of the district for the purpose of constructing a variety of things, including power transmission lines, pipelines, water transmission system. And actually, I cut off the quote a little earlier. I should have put, and other similar works. So, under the statute, you do have the authority as commissioners of the district to enter into an agreement. However, Section 430 puts a limitation on this. It says a license, easement, or right-of-way so granted shall not impair, hinder, prevent, or obstruct the use of such property for drainage or protection purposes, or cause any material damage to the same. So this gets back to your duty. When you are approached by a wind farm to discuss the possibility of crossing your structures, or going upon them or over them, keep in mind that whatever you agree to and whatever they do, they cannot impair the drainage or damage the system. And I'm jumping ahead, we'll get to negotiating in a second, but once you actually have a draft agreement, not just a draft, but actually one that you think is one that is in the best interest of the district and its landowners, you then have to apply to the court. And that petition will have attached to it the draft contract. And that contract will also have attached to it diagrams showing exactly where the route is going, over what structures it's going to cross or go along. You're going to file that petition. The court's going to say, all right, you got to set this for hearing. You're going to direct the circuit clerk to give notice to the affected landowner. Now the statute says the clerk will give whatever notice to the landowners the judge says is needed. Now, typically the ones I've negotiated that have dealt like, for example, power lines, electric power lines.
The court has basically said, you know, for those, you just give the notice to those landowners that are actually upon which these lines are going. And all we really had to do is then give published notice. All right. But you have to give notice of some sort. And then, most likely, no one's going to show up and object, or if they do, they're going to have a question about what's the impact here. But as long as there's no strong opposition, the court is going to approve that contract. All right, negotiating the agreement. At some point, or at the initial point, someone's maybe going to knock on your door and say, hey, I think, power company is going to want to come through here. All right? And quite frankly, any agreement that you negotiate is probably going to be the product of at least 3, 4, 5, 6 meetings with the wind company. All right? But the initial thing that you want to obtain is, I want an aerial photograph. All right? Show me what you're talking about. Where are you planning on, putting these particular facilities? And Don talked about this. You need to know exactly where your facilities are. All right? You have to know where your levee is, where your drainage tile is, where your ditches are, where your right-of-way is. You need to have the aerial photograph, the survey drawing from the wind company actually showing where they are going, where they're planning to put their lines, where they're going to put their facilities. And if they are within your right-of-way, they cross the structure, well, they're going to have your permission to do that by an agreement. All right, once again, you've got to identify the district structures involved and the district's location. You need an exact description from the company as to what it is that they're actually planning on doing here. All right? And this is sort of a cryptic little note, but you need the exact engineering drawings. You need the specifications of what equipment actually is going to be installed and where it's going to be installed. Now, when we talk about the agreement itself, and I think Don would agree with me, there's no one-size-fits-all. No two drainage districts are actually, absolutely the same. A contract for one may or may not fit in all respects with another drainage district. So the various topics I'm going to go through here are likely not exhaustive, all right? But I think at least food for thought as you go forward in thinking about what should be in an agreement. One, the easement rights granted should be non-exclusive. In other words, you want to retain as much authority over this land as you can going forward. It may be that you need to, for some other purpose, grant some other entity similar rights to go through or across some of the lands in question. So, to the extent that you can, you want to only give them a non-exclusive right. You'll see sometimes they want an exclusive right. They want to make sure that no one else has a right to come in there. It's going to be up to negotiation, but try to make this as a non-exclusive easement. You also want to make sure that the company is prohibited from granting or somehow subleasing, in a sense, their rights. In other words, you're giving them the right to use or to go across the property, right? And it would be expected that if somehow they sign or sell their interest to another company, that they may get to stand in those shoes. But you don't want them bringing in third parties that are unrelated, that you have no contractual obligation with. You don't want them to allow other people to use your property and go over your work. The company must be responsible for damage to the drainage facilities, such as the levees, ditches, all right? And this damage, these clauses that you're going to negotiate, and Don talked about them, is you're going to have issues related to the initial construction, damage that's caused as a result of that. Keep in mind, though, that once they put these up,
they're not leaving them, they're gonna have their maintenance people coming. They're gonna be needing to make repairs to their structures, so they're gonna be coming back on and across or along your structures. So the contract's gonna have to deal with their requirement to pay for the damage that they caused. Sometimes, depending on the contracts we've negotiated, have it sort of both ways. On the one hand, you require the company to do this work and to restore the structures that they damaged, or they pay us to get it done. Either way, the company has got to be responsible for paying all damage caused by their activities. And as Don mentioned, we talked about a written agreement. All this must be spelled out in specific detail. You cannot rely upon the good word or the shake of the shaking hand or pat on the back that they will do something down the road if there's a problem. All right, make sure everything is spelled out in detail. Issues. Some of our districts that we've worked with that have levees and have dealt with the power line. We have had, for example, put in the minimum height above the levee, for example. So Don talked to you, I think, also about specifications. When they're crossing the structures or going underneath the structure, you need to specify in detail what exactly is permitted and what is not. You do need to hire an engineer to assist you in determining what is really permitted and what should not be permitted. You also want to make sure that the company in the agreement recognizes that the ultimate authority in the district are the commissioners. The interest of the landowners is paramount. And so you want to make sure that that phrase is in that contract so it's very clear that when issues arise down the road relating to the district's needs, you have the ability to force them to take action. And one of those is relocation. Now, the agreements we've been able to negotiate with the power companies is essentially this. Yes, we've given you the right to place your facilities here. But if, as a result of the district needing to take its own actions, to make its own improvements in order to preserve and protect the lands of the district, well, if our new works require that they relocate their facilities, that they must relocate their facilities, and they do so at their own cost. So keep that in mind, is when you're negotiating these, the world's not going to stay the same. Your interest in the district, its works may change, or may need to change to either protect the district or from what you perceive to be issues, or, sometimes the federal government steps in and makes additional requirements on individuals and units of government. If the laws change requiring how you manage and protect the district, well, you need that ability to go back to the wind farm companies and say, we have to relocate our facilities, we're doing X, you've got to do the same, and you're going to pay your way. So push for that. Again, the company's operations must not interfere or impede the district's operation of the district. Make sure that the company maintains insurance coverage at all times, not just through the construction phase. Require them at least yearly to provide copies of their certificates of insurance, showing that they have liability insurance coverage, they have workers' comp insurance coverage. All right, and in the amounts of what you believe are sufficient to cover potential damages to the district. And I mentioned that just a moment ago about the ability to relocate it for improvement. Try to really push for an inclusion of such a requirement. And as far as advance notice, you also want to make sure that the document requires the district to let you know in advance when they plan to be out, doing, any sort of major work on the facilities. All right? You can understand an emergency situation could arise that they maybe can't provide you with that notice, but you ought to make sure that there's contact information in there that when they know that they're going to be out doing any work, they have an obligation to call your designated representative. Dawn mentioned the decertification plan. I referenced it or have an abandonment plan. This is crucial. Make sure that your agreement sets forth what's going to happen should this company decide to cease using these facilities. Because you definitely do not want to be stuck having to deal with them when they're no longer being used. And so you can require that ahead of time, and actually in the agreement itself, you really need to have a good detailed outline of what's going to be required, what the time frame is going to be, and who you're going to be dealing with. And Don mentioned also, I don't have a slide here, this idea of the surety bond. They require them to post some sort of money that would help you down the road if in fact you have to take any sort of action to get rid of this equipment. But once again, you want to have as much of this agreement that's requiring this company or its successors to remove those equipment. Now, that's not a 100% guarantee that they, you can't prevent them from automatically filing bankruptcy or closing down their shop and leaving and not answering the phone. All right? But if you have some mechanisms in place, you have a surety that's out there, at least you have the potential of realizing some monies to help you alleviate the problem down the road. Also, make sure that the venue, when I say venue, where can you bring a lawsuit? You want the contract to clearly say that this contract is governed by the laws of the state of Illinois, and any lawsuits related to it will be located in the county in which the district is formed. All right? Because in other words, you want the hometown advantage, and you want to make sure that they agree that we get the hometown advantage if there's a dispute. One other issue I wanted to bring up with you, Dawn mentioned fees, this idea of charging for them to cross. That is an absolutely great idea and should be included. Also, though, in a couple of districts we've represented that have levies, we've also been able to go back to these companies and say, all right, our levies are protecting your facilities. You should be required to pay benefits for that. In other words, a regular assessment benefit. And we have negotiated typically lump sum payments in exchange for not requiring an annual assessment. They have made large lump sum payments to the district. Now, in order to arrive at that, you do need to work with qualified professionals that model and really study the impact of your drainage system and how it protects the structures of the company. All right? And so think about payment of annual benefits. And because your facilities may actually provide flood protection. If you have levees, do many of you have levees in your district? No. Okay. If you have levees, you're in probably a stronger position to argue, say, but for our levy, you would really be subject to significant flooding on
a yearly basis every 2 years, depending on what the event might be, all right? And based on that, calculations can be run as to determine really what the annual benefit is. There's an engineering firm that I dealt with. Be happy to talk to you individually if you were interested in knowing. Now, I don't want to say that a district that doesn't have levies might not be able to charge annual benefits, all right, or reach some sort of agreement, all right? That'd be between you and the engineers to determine, hey, or can you really demonstrate that you're, what benefits you're actually providing by your drainage system. But I do want to point that out, that's a possibility. Questions?
Do you have any luck in negotiating the rent on paying the attorney fees that these districts are going to incur?
Yes, that's always.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, absolutely. The question is, what luck do you have in getting the companies paid for your attorney's fees? On all the contracts we've negotiated, they've always paid the attorney's fees.
Would it be best then, when the ordinances are created, for your wind farm or solar farm, wouldn't it just behoove to have all of these protections in the ordinances? Then each drainage district does not have to come in and negotiate on their own?
Well, the question is can we put all these requirements in sort of an ordinance so that the individual drainage districts do not have to negotiate their own agreements? Okay. I'm not sure that completely works, because keep in mind, each district has its own interest, has its own facilities, all right? And so it might have its own specifics, this is what we're interested in doing and what we're seeing. But you're right, with regards to the ordinances of the county, for example, all right? A lot of issues can be, set forward, whether it's location, whether damage issues. I think the county can go a long way in putting, building specifications basically on these that could be enforced. But to the extent that, drainage districts are units of local government in and of themselves. So they have a right to, to govern what's happening with their own facilities. So I don't think you'd ever really take the drainage districts out. Yes, sir.
I think I'm beginning to understand why the commissioners were supposed to be notified before a special use permit was issued by the county. Is there a time period in between us being notified and them issuing the permit so that we had time to accomplish all this?
I'm not familiar with the current situation, but my understanding in general parlance with regards to special use permits, advance notice is typically given to the affected landowners in the community for a time to object. There's usually public notice given of that, and the opportunity to at least appear at a meeting when it's discussed.
To that point, an official public notice a lot of times just besides classified just a county daily paper. So is there a requirement, I feel like there should be, that to John's question over there, commissioners and landowners should specifically be sent a written notice? But is that in the rules, or is it still just really weak as far as notice of a lot of these hearings and meetings?
One, you have to look at the county ordinances that govern what notice must be given. I know that in zoning context, all right, there are, depending on what type of zoning you're dealing with, the issues, there are specific notices that have to be given to landowners that are, like, say, adjacent to, if you're trying to change the classification of a piece of property, for example, most often, say, like in a city or village. Well, those residents that are living within, say, 1,000 feet or so are typically required to receive actual written notice of the proposed
Written notice requirements in the county.
I would think, I think you want to don't check what the rules are. Go talk to the commissioners and say, we want more notice. We want you to consider amending your rules to allow more additional notice.
Is that newspaper notice? I mean, a lot of people may not even take it. And it's in with all the classifieds. Easy.
It gets buried.
Yeah, thanks.
If I could. The way that works, and right now we don't have any kind of wind farm thing going on, but for the solar farm, I sent out notice to everybody, a connected landowner, via return receipt mail, so that I know they got it. So everybody is notified in a sense that what happened now. Before, I didn't know that there was a drainage district, okay, and I apologize for that. And I didn't know that there was 3 drainage commissioners per district, and again, I apologize for that. Now that I know that, I will work to include everybody that's in an affected area around that. You know, I'm new, kind of got cut me a little slack. I'm still learning. But yeah, every time we do that, I have to send out, and that's for a change in whether you're going to go from residential to commercial. If you're going to have a variance put on your farm for something, anything, the affected landowners, the people around that, would have to get a notice in the mail, and I send that out.
Good, thanks for that. That's kind of about your goodwill, but not really anything.
Oh no, that's in the ordinance. That's part of the job.
Okay.
But there's a perfect example of, here's a local person who did not know.
And that's why I spoke up.
And so if you think that the wind farm or solar farm folks know those requirements, even the local folks don't know that the drainage district commissioners are out there and should be notified. So if you think that you're going to get notice from anybody else, think again. They don't even know you exist, because there's no drainage districts. Another big thing is Julie locates. You'll hear it over and over again. Here's somebody that's going to put a fiber optic cable through your drainage district, and the first thing they'll say is, well, why didn't you mark your facilities with Julie? Which of course drainage districts are not part of Julie. But as far as they're concerned, you should have been out there marking your facilities with Julie. And so you go round and round with that. Well, we did what we were always required to do. We called Julie. Utility locating. So you really have to be proactive.
A landowner question.
Right?
Solar farm. Say that hail does happen, or kids bust them up, and we get a 6-inch rain that night, and toxins flow onto the neighboring farm, make the ground inept, and they produce, what happens, vegetation killed, whatever. What's my right? Is it too late at that time, or do I go see the solar company during construction? Do I go see them afterwards or after incident? What's the deal there?
Yeah, my experience is more on the wind side of things than solar, but generally speaking, what I would say is it's going to be somewhat dependent. Are you talking about a situation where you're envisioning yourself having one of these on your land, being an adjacent landowner?
Adjacent landowner that just land water will flow on me if something like that would happen.
Sure. Yeah, if there is water flow to you, and particularly if there's contaminated water flow onto you, and you don't have a contract with them, there's nothing that's altered the basic law of the state of Illinois that would normally control in those situations. So to the extent that there would be any contaminants that would get into your groundwater or to damage your crops, then at that point, I mean, we would treat it almost like a garden variety trespass. You know, if chemicals flow onto your land and kill your crops, it's really, in my opinion, no different than if somebody were to, walk onto your land with a torch and burn your crops down. So at that point, what we would do is we would reach out to the entity who's responsible for that and try to negotiate some sort of compensation for you from that incident. And if for some reason they were not willing to negotiate, or if the negotiations did not yield the result that you wanted, then we'd have to file suit for trespass.
So any EPA regulations related to that?
I'm sure that there are. Do I know what they are offhand? I do not.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Oh.
Are there any EPA regulations related that we can contact you on?
EPA regulations.
Yeah, the question was EPA regulations. I'm not conversant in those. I would be amazed if there were not.
There are EPA regulations, but if you think that the Illinois EPA is going to be a channel for enforcement for you, that's not the case. Illinois EPA has half the staff that it did 10 years ago, and so unless you are Chicagoland area, there's no enforcement.
And in any
unless it's
event,
something that's very egregious. I'm just saying that's the reality. That downstate gets no love.
In the solar regulations, are there anything that addresses this, you know, the potential toxic contaminants that could go onto the land? Are any of the ordinances addressing that?
Some of the ones in the Chicagoland area have. I don't know what your county's going to do. It's got to be part of that county ordinance. So,
The one thing that I would just maybe add on to what Ryan said to that question, and maybe kind of goes a little bit, not only you might have a claim for damages, but in the right scenario, you might have a claim for what we call an injunction.
right.
You find, you know, as part of a lawsuit, you're filing, not only maybe you might want some monetary damages, but part of it is you want them to stop doing what it is they're doing. And so whether it's dumping extra water on you, that type of thing, it's a trespass, we want it to stop. So we want an order from the court saying, company, you're going to resolve this. Not sure how that's going to be resolved, but you're going to do it, so adjacent landowner doesn't keep it.
And that actually ties into, there was a question earlier during Don's presentation about, you know, do we have the ability to stop construction if something is going on that's inappropriate? And ultimately, you know, my answer to that question would be, it depends on what's in your contract, it depends on what's in your ordinance, and there will probably be nothing you can do, even if it's in your contract or in your ordinance, you know, where you will run out onto your property and up to a contractor and say to them, look at this provision, you're doing it wrong, I want you to stop. I mean, chances are good that they will ignore that. But what it does give you the ability to do, if you think it's a large enough issue, is take that contractual provision, take that ordinance provision, and go into court and try to get a temporary injunction, and you can start with a 10-day temporary restraining order, which you can often get without even having to give much notice to the initial party, to try to halt it if there's something going on that's a real significant issue. Now, of course, there is process involved in that, and there are, in some circumstances, where the offending act will be over and done before you can even get in front of a judge, but that would be your best tool if there's something ongoing that you're trying to stop, though the tool even before that is to try to make sure your contract is well negotiated, try to make sure if you're working with your local elected officials, make sure your ordinance is well drafted, so hopefully it doesn't even get up there.
You're not going to recover your attorney's fees if you have to go to court, so is it not, as I asked earlier, is it not important that our local county board, zoning officers look at these issues and address them in the ordinances so we at least have something to rely on that protects us when we're not part of the negotiation of the contract that you're talking about?
Yeah, and the question for anybody who might not have heard is, you know, we're not going to recoup our attorney's fees if we have to go to court. So is it important for us to work with our local officials to make sure that the ordinances are well drafted so that they're providing some protection on the front end? I would say two things to that. First of all, if you negotiate your contract in the right way, you might get your attorney's fees if you have to go to court. Because not with all of the companies we've dealt with, but with some of the utility companies we've dealt with, pipelines and things, we actually have gotten them to put provisions in that say the prevailing party in litigation will recoup their attorney's fees. number one. But number two, the broader point that the question raises is one that's very well taken, is that, you know, your local counties are going to be working on getting these ordinances in place. There will be public hearings on these ordinances. You have the right to contact your elected officials at any time. And yes, you should be actively working with them to raise your concerns through that process.
This gentleman had a question.
We have a lot of plastic water line out there that can be crushed very easily. And we have easements for all of that. How does that fall in?
Well, I think it falls in the same way. One, you need to know where your easements are. Okay, maybe you have your boundaries of your district, you need to know where all your facilities are. Okay, first that's for starters. Now, as far as getting notice, is that sort of what the question is?
Yes, because once again, and our board were not aware of anything like this until I brought it up.
Well, maybe one of the things that you can do is, now that, for example, you're aware of it, you make sure that the commissioners, those county officials are aware of your existence and that you want notice of these when things are contemplated. Now, once again, if it's not in their ordinance or their rules that they have to give you specific notice, all right, they can always fall back and say, hey, we're not required to. But go insist that perhaps they change their rules.
Well, the other thing too is that we got larger to take care of. Now we're moving back into places in the counties, picking up more, but we don't have easements for that. Well, is there rules over trump ours, easements, or the ability to get the easements?
You're taking over other water systems?
No, we're not taking over of it. We have some unserved people out in the county.
Got it.
We're trying to pick those people up.
Right.
We don't necessarily have an easement on each one of those individual properties for them to get there. I hope we don't run into this thing where we can't get an easement because the wind tower got an easement in the contract.
I will say this, over the past several years, I have worked with 3 different wind energy companies that have tried to establish wind farms in either Morgan County, and I'm just starting to work with one that's trying to do some work in Macoupin County. In all of the agreements that I have seen those 3 companies propose, and granted there could be another company out there that does something differently, but in all 3 of those companies' agreements, there has been an indication that their uses of the landowner's land are specifically for wind power generation purposes. And there's typically a clause in there that says that all other rights are reserved to the landowner. So at least as I read the agreements that I've dealt with so far, I have not seen anything in them that would prevent a landowner from subsequently granting other easements to any entity other than a company that is trying to generate wind power. Now, of course, it might change the route of some of your easements because you might not be able to cross over where some of the cables are. You obviously, wouldn't be able to dig underneath a wind turbine because there's 35 feet of concrete underneath it. But no, I mean, based on all the agreements I've seen so far, you should still be able to get through there.
Thank you for clearing that up.
Yep.
So I wonder, like my sister's 80 acres, they are probably going to be building these solar panels for a couple of years. I assume that you'd have to have your ducks in order, which you would, with the contract, before that all started operating. Is that right?
I would think so. I mean, I think that's what you would want.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the question for anybody who might not have heard, there's a sister who's got some land, 80 acres, I think you said, to be surrounded by solar panels. And it could be that they never approached her about the possibility of a contract because they did, and she's, I assume, said no.
Well,
or she's
they
thinking
wouldn't
about
tell
it.
her how many acres they wanted.
Yeah.
She says the farmer has the equipment. If you leave 20 or 30 acres in the back, how are they gonna get to it? You know, she decided it wasn't anything for sure that you had any control.
Right. And ultimately, if you are, and I think this goes more generally to questions of what if I am a landowner who has one of these projects coming into my area and I decide for whatever reason that I do not want to participate in it. What are my rights at that point if everybody around me signs up and I don't sign up? And at that point, you know, it is true that you will not have had the ability to negotiate on some specific protections, but you do retain, and it sort of goes to that gentleman's question there, you do retain all your rights under Illinois common law and statutory law that you've always had. Now, granted, that might be old comfort because there are situations in which you may have to go into court to enforce those rights. But if there's a situation where their operations are disrupting her land, disturbing water flow, those sorts of things, then she potentially has the right to file suit for any monetary damages she has, or to potentially obtain an injunction. A couple of other things that are related, at least based on what I've seen with the wind farm agreements, is a couple of the companies have done some things. One of them, the one that's gotten the furthest along in Morgan County, started off their land acquisition phase by going through and trying to get landowners to sign these full, very lengthy lease agreements that gave them the right to install the turbines or whatever other improvements that they would like to install on their property. They had some of the individuals who were just a flat no, wanted no part of it, and then a year later, they came back around when they had enough land acquired to construct the wind farm, and they approached some of those landowners with easement agreements that were a lot more simple because they realized that they still needed to run some cable underground in that land. So there's a possibility that even if she passed on the initial agreement, they might come back to her later on with something of that nature, which might give her a little bit of leverage to try to negotiate protections there. There was also, or there have also been some instances where they've offered individuals what they refer to, and this is specific to one company, I don't know if others would necessarily do it, they've offered what they refer to as good neighbor agreements. And what I saw those used with oftentimes were situations where if there was just an individual who had a house and 3 acres or something relatively small, where they didn't, you know, there weren't going to be any improvements put on that land, but they were going to be surrounded, they did offer some, you know, smaller amount of compensation in exchange for, you know, basically not objecting, and theoretically some additional protections could be negotiated into something like that as well, though at the end of the day, you know, the person who would be entering into that kind of agreement has less leverage than somebody who they would like to actually site turbines on.
Any other questions?
Yes, I'd like to know who actually owns these wind farm companies. Are they foreign, are they American, or who owns them?
That is dependent on the individual company. Of the 3 companies that I have dealt with, one of them has been a 100% American-owned company. One of them has been the subsidiary of a German company that's dealt in clean energy over there for years. And the third I'm still looking into. But the thing to keep in mind with that is pretty well all of the agreements that I've seen, and I can't imagine agreements from other companies would be any different, is all of the agreements that I've seen give very broad rights for the company to sell the project, to assign the project. So one thing that I make sure to say to people is, if you think you've got a good relationship with company X, who's going to construct a wind or a solar project on your land, don't count on your good relationship with company X as part of your thought process in entering into the agreement, because there's no guarantee that they'll be the company that you're dealing with in 10, 15, 20 years. And as a matter of fact, one of the companies that I have dealt with is very upfront and open about the fact that their business model 90% of the time is to develop the project, construct the project, and sell it. They'll tell you that right up front.
Of the two companies operating in Christian County, do you know who owns them, Trade Winds and the other one?
Honestly, until I drove down here today, I did not know that there were potential developments in Christian County. If anybody has more specific questions or wants me to look into that, I would be more than happy to.
Another question back here.
On this decommissioning plan, we've heard any numbers from 35,000 to 900,000. Is there any way we could tap into that for like tiles or anything?
The question, and I'm not sure I understand the question, as I understood it, could you use the money from the decommissioning plan for tile repair?
Or make some kind of variance in that?
You basically make them set aside a certain amount of money to repair tile?
Or any kind of disagreements that would come up there?
Well, once again, it's up to negotiation, okay, as to whether or not you can get them, whether it's through a bond or a letter of credit that they leave, that they act. A letter of credit is better and easier to deal with, because if you have a bond, you have a surety company you have to deal with, and they're going to take every step that they can to not honor that. So a letter of credit at a national bank of some sort, and $750,000, $1 million, whatever, that can be drawn upon under certain circumstances, that would be the ideal.
And I suppose, what you're asking about, setting aside a pool of money for drain tile repairs or other repairs, I suppose that is theoretically possible if you negotiate it or get it into an ordinance. It's not something I've seen up to this point, and probably the reason that I've not seen it up to this point is that when we're talking about the bond, the letter of credit, whatever it might be, it's really designed to protect and control in the situation that they're taking the wind farm offline or need to take the wind farm offline, but they've gone belly up and they don't have the money to do it. When we're talking about doing things like drain tile repair, that's usually when they're actively constructing the project and they'll have the cash on hand.
Or decommission.
Well, Don mentioned that wind companies have a tendency to walk away from the project or file bankruptcy instead of decommissioning, and you're saying, would a letter of credit or irrevocable letter of credit be protection for something like that were to happen? And I'd be curious to know if Don is familiar with any incidents like that ever happening in Illinois where wind farm companies walk away instead of decommissioning or file bankruptcy, you said.
Well, I guess maybe you misinterpreted what I said. What I said was that you have to sort of think of that scenario as you're negotiating your agreement, because that company from wherever they're at, Germany, Tokyo, American, doesn't really matter. The executives running that company are going to look at the cost versus the benefit. And so if it's most beneficial for them to walk away, that's what they'll do. If it's more beneficial for them to fully decommission everything, that's what they'll do. They'll make an economic decision, and they really won't care how it impacts you. So that's why you have to, at the front end, make sure that you're protected at your end with potential decommission.
So that's where the letter of credit and irrevocable letter of credit would come into play, correct?
Right, and as far as specific examples of a wind farm going bankrupt and leaving the improvements behind go, I don't think you would have any specific examples of that in the United States yet, because this is still a relatively new concept. You know, we're not at a point yet where the first of these wind farms that have been constructed have gotten to the end of their natural lives. So we can't give examples, but we do need, as Don has emphasized, and I think Alan and I would as well, we do need to think of it as a worst case scenario and try to control for it on the front end.
Understood.
Jack's got a question.
Yeah, just a comment for, excuse me, drainage commissioners as well as private landowners. You fix your tile. You don't let them fix it. You fix it to your specifications, they reimburse you. Because several of us have been through this with pipelines, with high lines, and with the Illinois Department of Transportation. Enough said. Fix it yourself.
We're running out of time for the 2 hours that we set aside, and these gentlemen are going to be here, so if you've got individual questions, you can come up and talk with them.